Welcome to today's Explainer. We're jumping right into the mechanics of geopolitics, economics, and governance to see how they dictated the ultimate fate of one of history's absolute greatest superpowers, the Tang Dynasty. This wasn't just a political entity, you guys. It was a beautifully complex machine. So today, we're going to break down exactly how that incredible machine was built and why, eventually, it completely broke down.
Okay, taking a quick look at our roadmap for today. We're covering openness and inclusivity, the Chang'an economy, international trade, the An Lushan Rebellion, and finally, the ultimate collapse.
All right, let's dive into Section 1, openness and inclusivity, which was really the core foundation here.
So the Tang Dynasty fueled a true golden age through what I can only describe as extreme inclusivity. They didn't just tolerate the outside world, they actively embraced it. There's this brilliant quote from Emperor Tang Taizong that perfectly captures their mindset. He said, "Since ancient times, China has been esteemed and barbarians despised, but I love them equally." And the crazy thing, that wasn't just empty political rhetoric. They actually applied a strict one-family approach to governance. For instance, they set up the Jimi system for minority groups, which kept local leaders right in their traditional roles of power. And even more surprisingly for the era, they actually employed diverse minority generals to secure their borders. Basically, they were neutralizing conflicts through inclusion rather than just brute force. By just dropping those strict entry restrictions, they allowed monks, students, and merchants from all over Europe and Asia to literally flood into the capital. We're talking about a massive cultural fusion here, blending traditional Chinese culture with Persian art, Indian Buddhism, and Central Asian music. It was like a giant cultural melting pot. Plus, this super open social climate allowed for remarkable social mobility. Commoners could actually rise up through the ranks just by passing the imperial examination system. This openness, it was the absolute bedrock of their power.
Moving right along to Section 2, the Chang'an economy, or as I like to call it, the core engine.
You see, you simply can't have an empire without a beating heart, right? And the capital city of Chang'an was exactly that. Just to put its sheer scale into perspective for you, it covered an area of over 84 square kilometers. That completely dwarfed major contemporaries like Rome and Byzantium. And amazingly, this highly organized, bustling metropolis permanently hosted over 100,000 foreign residents. It was a truly global city way ahead of its time.
Now you can see this dual-engine economy clearly split between two massive hubs. On one side, you had the East Market, which was packed with local goods, domestic specialties, beautiful silks, and teas. Then you contrast that with the West Market. This acted as this wild, bustling international hub for global merchants. This is exactly where you'd go to find exotic spices from the West, Persian carpets, and tons of foreign businessmen setting up shop. To reduce trade friction in a huge marketplace like that, they had to innovate. And they developed these absolutely incredible financial microsystems. They created guifang, which were essentially early banks for secure currency storage and exchange. But even more brilliantly, they invented feichan, which translates to flying money. Think of it as the 8th century equivalent of a wire transfer or a traveler's check. That way, merchants didn't have to lug heavy strings of copper coins across massive distances. These innovations dramatically lowered costs for merchants and ended up supporting over 200 distinct commercial industries, a real game changer.
So, what's the result of all this? An unstoppable, completely self-sustaining economic loop. Production, circulation, and consumption fed into each other seamlessly. Perfectly supported by massive agricultural and transportation networks, the capital was just an absolute economic marvel.
Which brings us to Section 3, International Trade, the global bloodline of the empire.
Building on that incredible domestic engine we just talked about, they took all that internal momentum and pushed it outward across the globe. They used a really clever dual-track strategy fueled by tax incentives. On one hand, they secured the Land Silk Road, moving massive amounts of silk and tea through the Hexi Corridor all the way to Central Asia and Europe. But on the other hand, they expanded massively into the Maritime Silk Road. They were launching these huge advanced ships from ports like Guangzhou and Quanzhou, sailing all the way to India and Arabia just to bring in luxury goods like ivory and rhinoceros horn.
The macro effect of this entire global loop was literally astounding. It didn't just fill up the national treasury with customs taxes, though it definitely did that. More importantly, it completely solidified the empire's diplomatic and cultural supremacy across the Eastern Hemisphere. It firmly established the Tang Dynasty as the undisputed superpower of its time. No question about it.
But now we hit Section 4, the An Lushan Rebellion, which is our fatal turning point.
Okay,
So here is where the pendulum swings violently backward. To really understand the cause and effect of this empire's fracturing, we have to look at one critical institutional shift. You see, the empire originally relied on the Fubing system. This was a centralized peasant militia, where farmers served as soldiers controlled directly by the central government. Sounds pretty stable, right? Well, severe land monopolization forced them to abandon this for what they called the Mubing system. Suddenly, the military was made up of regional professional mercenaries. These were essentially private armies who answered only to their local commanders. They were completely bypassing the emperor.
And you can probably guess what happened next. This massive systemic loophole allowed a general named An Lushan to just stockpile supreme military, financial, and administrative authority across 3 massive northern regions. He essentially built his own independent kingdom right inside the empire, and this culminated in an absolutely catastrophic 8-year rebellion against the central government. The devastation from this was completely irreversible. The entire agricultural and economic heartland in the north was just burned to ash. That glorious capital of Chang'an we talked about, it fell twice. Its infrastructure was completely ruined, and to make matters even worse, while the empire was completely distracted fighting itself, the land Silk Road was totally severed by invading Tibetan forces. Just like that, the empire's global bloodline was cut.
That leads us right into Section 5, the ultimate collapse, focusing on the deep logic and destiny of the empire.
The following century saw an absolute cascade of failures. Even after the An Lushan Rebellion ended, the damage was permanently done. The central government completely lost control, which led to Fanzhen separatism. This is where regional warlords basically fragmented the nation into independent little states. Obviously, this led to extreme wealth disparity and massive overtaxation on the poor, which inevitably sparked the massive Huangqiao peasant rebellion in the late 9th century. Finally, in 907 AD, a warlord named Zhu Wen usurped the throne, officially ending a dynasty that had lasted for nearly 3 centuries.
Internally, the political architecture just rotted away completely. The central government faced an extreme loss of tax revenue, mostly bleeding out to those regional warlords. Back in the capital, the government was completely paralyzed by eunuchs who, and this is incredible, actually gained control over the military and the imperial succession. Add in decades of endless, paralyzing factional political warfare, and you have a leadership completely ignoring the suffering of its displaced, overtaxed citizens. The inevitable result was the total collapse of diplomatic and border security.
So, if you take one thing away from this explainer, let it be this. The dynasty didn't just fall overnight. It collapsed because it exhausted its foundational systems. It abandoned meaningful reform, and ultimately, it forgot the very people it governed. It just became this hollow shell of its former inclusive, dynamic self.
I want to leave you with this final thought to ponder today. What actually happens when an open, thriving superpower forgets its foundational institutions and the welfare of its people? The mechanics of the Tang Dynasty's rise and fall offer a really profound and universally applicable lesson for any superpower throughout history. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive. I really hope this architectural view of history helps you understand the structures of the world around us just a little bit better today.